This is one of the most outrageous and also chilling stories about press freedom and treatment of activists and journalists. The Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, ordered a fighter jet to escort a passenger flight operated by Ryanair to the ground in Minsk, Belarus, so that a specific passenger on that flight, Roman Protasevich, an exiled critic of Lukashenko, could be arrested. Now, you might be asking, well, what was Protasevich doing flying to Belarus, knowing that an arrest could be what is going to happen at the tail end of it? Well, the answer is that he actually was not. That is not actually what he was doing. This was a Ryanair flight, flight number 4978. Ryanair is a European low-cost carrier, which is not exactly a pleasure to fly on, I will tell you. The flight was scheduled to go from Athens, Greece to Vilnius, Lithuania. But it just so happens that this flight flies over Belarusian airspace. And Belarus launched a fighter jet to intercept the plane, have it land in Minsk, Belarus. Every passenger was removed. One explanation that was apparently given, although I'll get back to this, is that there was a, quote, potential security threat on board. So Belarusian authorities have everybody get off the plane. They check everything and they say, great news, everything's fine. After 5 hours on the ground, it was a false alarm. Everybody can leave. Everybody gets back on the plane, but not really everybody. One passenger wasn't there when they reboarded. After the 5 hours on the ground in Minsk, Roman Protasevich was not there, was taken into custody, and did not reboard the plane. Now, afterwards, the Ryanair flight took off for Vilnius, and everything resumed, quote, as normal. And we'll talk about Ryanair's explanation for what took place. So who is this Roman Protasevich? Protasevich is the founder of the Telegram channel Nexta, which was used to organize anti-Belarusian government protests. Another similar channel critical of the government was also run by Protasevich. Both are classified as extremist in Belarus, and Protasevich is also on a government wanted list for terrorism. But Belarus has a strongman authoritarian in power who has been in power since 1994, was abruptly inaugurated into office for the sixth time in a row last September following a disputed election that the EU said was not a legitimate election. And amid mass protests in Belarus last summer, Lukashenko and the state security apparatus started removing from the country or detaining leading opposition figures. And now they've grounded a plane forcibly to take an activist off of it. Now, there's another really wacky part to this story. The statement that was put out by Ryanair about the flight makes no mention of the fact that they were strong-armed by an authoritarian government that has been in power for nearly 30 years, and that one of their passengers was taken off the flight. The Ryanair press office tweeted, quote, "Our flight 4978 has landed safely in Vilnius at 7:25 p.m. local time, or UK time, 9:25 local time. Here is Ryanair's statement on today's diversion to Minsk airport." And when you read it, it sounds like nothing really happened. It just says the crew on a Ryanair flight to Vilnius today were notified by Belarus about a potential security threat on board, and were instructed to divert to the nearest airport. That was Minsk. The aircraft landed safely. Passengers were offloaded. Security checks were completed by locals. Nothing untoward was found, and authorities cleared the craft to depart together with passengers and crew after about 7 hours on the ground. I had said 5 in Minsk. The aircraft departed for Vilnius at 18:50 UK time and landed at 19:25 UK time. Ryanair has notified the relevant national and European safety and security agencies. We apologize sincerely to all affected. It's like there wasn't someone pulled off after the flight was escorted to land by a fighter jet. Rather, it was just a check and everything was fine and no big deal. And the other thing about this that's raising red flags is nobody's even on the same page about what happened. Story one was there was a potential threat, so the plane landed and they checked whether there really was a threat. The Minsk airport told Russian state media RIA Novosti that the plane made an emergency landing because of an unconfirmed bomb threat. But then a spokesperson for Lithuanian airports said to LRT National Radio that the landing was because there was a conflict on the flight between a passenger and one of the crew members. Completely different explanations. Now, the EU and the US have condemned this arrest and how it took place. This is really the stuff of horrors. And as a passenger, I'd be furious at the delay. Besides the politics, flying with Ryanair is horrible, and I avoid it whenever possible. Now they made me have 2 flights, really? I'm kidding around. Obviously, that's not really the important thing here. This is really horrifying. It is dystopian, and we're going to follow it. But are we ever going to hear from Roman Protasevich again? I don't know the answer to that. And as of right now, we don't know exactly what fate awaits him or has already been carried out against him. So scary stuff, and just a bizarre, whitewashed sort of statement from Ryanair. And we will presumably learn more about this as the days go on. Facts do not matter when nobody pays attention to them. Bad acts don't matter when there are no punishments or consequences for those bad acts. And that is exactly what is happening with the Trump riots. There is a new Ipsos poll which finds that 54% of Republicans believe that the Trump riots were led not by violent Trumpists, but that the Trump riots were actually led by violent left-wingers trying to make Donald Trump look bad, which they obviously were Trump supporters, as hundreds of pages of court documents about the now indicted defendants now show. So there is no factual basis for a belief that more than half of Republicans claim to have. Some months ago, we asked, will Republican elected officials be punished for not voting for the COVID relief bill? Because that bill was so popular and only Democrats voted for it. Joe Biden supported it. And it turns out that a ton of Republican voters think that Republican officials did vote for it. We talked about that poll last week. A whole bunch of Republican voters who got $1,400 checks believe I got this check because of Republicans, even though they didn't. Similarly, a huge portion of Republicans simply refuse to accept or have been convinced into believing that the Trump riots of January 6th weren't really Trumpists rioting, but rather left-wingers in disguise just trying to make Donald Trump look bad. The poll numbers are disgusting in terms of what they mean about the disconnect in this country between facts and beliefs. Check this out. Only 29% of Republicans strongly or somewhat agree Trump was at least partially to blame for the riots, just 29%. However, 48% of Republicans believe that the people who gathered were mostly peaceful. And then 54% either strongly or somewhat agree that the riots were actually led by left-wingers trying to make Donald Trump look bad. And it gets even wilder. When asked, who do you think the true president is right now? 53% of Republicans believe that today, right now, Donald Trump is the true president of the United States. Now, strangely, 3% of Democrats also believe Trump is the true president. I'd love to speak to them. And 22% of independents think that Trump is actually the president right now. This is a national tragedy. This is a national emergency of critical thinking, of tribalism, of group psychosis, of all of it and more. Now, I do think it's really important to mention this is different than what we had in the past. In the past, we had partisanship. We had partisan disagreements about, did it make sense to go into Iraq? Who did 9/11? You had a lot of people who watch a lot of Fox News confused at thinking it was actually Iraq that did 9/11. This is now a large-scale Republican slide away from objective reality to a degree that we've not seen in this country before. It is actually becoming cult-like. And this is a serious, real question. It's not a joke. It's not an insult. It's a real question. Are these Republicans genuinely delusional in the diagnostic sense, or are they deliberately lying to pollsters about everything? How did they lose their connection to reality? Matthew Sheffield has a really good piece in Flux about this, exploring exactly this question, where he says maybe Republicans are lying to pollsters in order to, as they might see it, help the party. It might be less about Republicans literally believe that left-wingers pretending to be Trumpists did the riot, but they are saying that to pollsters to send a message that they are with Trump no matter what. For example, right? That would be one possibility as to why we are seeing these numbers in poll after poll after poll. What do you think? Whatever the explanation, it's horrifying and scary, but the practical matter is, how do we fix it? And we can only fix it if we know what the true problem is. Is this a grand delusion, a group psychosis of Republicans where they actually believe Trump is literally the president right now? The riots weren't actually Trumpists, despite what all the social media accounts and court records and all of it say. It was leftists in disguise. Do they literally believe that, or is it a delusion of theirs? And are they answering polls genuinely, or in a way meant to send a message that they are with Trump no matter what? Let me know your thinking on this, because the answer is not trivial in terms of what it means about how we actually go about the deprogramming of the people that have this mass delusion, or have decided we are going to lie in order to send a message. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @Pakman. We are just 1 week away from the Monday Memorial Day one-day membership bomb. We have sadly had a lot of people, more than I care to say, hundreds and hundreds of people cancel memberships in the last month for financial reasons. And so we are doing a one-day membership special on May 31st, hoping to invite a lot of those folks back and people who have never before been members. If you've been thinking of getting a membership and you're just waiting for the perfect day is Memorial Day. If you want to hear about that special Monday morning, just get on my mailing list at davidpakman.com. The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today. Remember that we are primarily supported by members who sign up at joinpakman.com. I won't say more about it. I think everybody knows what to do. Joinpakman.com. As if we don't already have enough anti-Semitism to deal with right now, radical and outrageous right-wing Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is comparing having to wear a mask in the House of Representatives to the Holocaust. Greene was interviewed by the Christian Broadcasting Network's David Brody on the Real America's Voice TV show. Yes, that's a real channel. That's a real show. Here is what she had to say.
This woman is mentally ill. You know, we can look back in a time in history where people were told to wear a gold star, and they were definitely treated like second-class citizens, so much so that they were put in trains and taken to gas chambers in Nazi Germany. And this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about. Well, let's talk about the Queen of the House of Hypocrites.
There was no pushback at all from the interviewer, David Brody, there. A mask mandate from mentally ill Nancy Pelosi is like Jews being murdered in the Holocaust, according to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, of course, there's no follow-up from the reporter because CBN isn't journalism. It's merely propaganda, and the guy really isn't a reporter. But at the same time, to say nothing is really not an option. This has to be called out when something for the greater good, like vaccination or wearing a mask during a pandemic, is being compared to the genocide of the Jewish people. You have to call it out and say this isn't accurate. And anybody who enables it, in this case, it was David Brody on the Christian Broadcasting Network enabling it, also must be called out. The Nazis didn't order the Jews to do things that kept them safe. That wasn't what went on during the Holocaust. Rules established to protect health are not the same as the systematic extermination of a people. And of course, the greater tragedy is that this woman was elected to be a member of Congress. It's not even clear to me that Marjorie Taylor Greene should have a driver's license. And there's an entire political movement that believes she should be one of the 535 federal lawmakers, 100 senators, 435 in the House, 535 total, There's a movement that thinks in a country of 331 million, one of the 535 leading us at the federal level should be her. That is really, really dangerous. And this is what happens when we either look away or we don't vote or we don't vote in large enough numbers. I got an email from a viewer who believes he understands how people like Marjorie Taylor Greene come to have a following in the first place. And the way he outlined it was, you start with years and years of fear mongering about you know who, right? Years and years of fear mongering about Democrats and minorities taking advantage of welfare programs, brown people coming here illegally and stealing your jobs and committing crimes, all of that fear mongering that you know of. You combine it with sensationalist propaganda news media, Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, Christian Broadcasting Network, and then you have underfunded education, parents who don't know anything about media literacy, so they can't teach their kids, so the kids have no place to learn it. And then you direct at the self-centered sort of upper middle class suburbanites like Greene. You direct the propaganda at them, absent the education that they need. They become deranged. They become obsessed with protecting their own status that's being threatened by, Democrats, non-existent socialists, minorities, immigrants, poor people, etc. They identify them as the enemies. And then in a country of 331 million people, imagine, this is who ends up getting elected as one of 435 members of the House, one of 535 members of the House and Senate. It is a vile and disgusting analogy that she makes. She is a vile woman. And I know that sometimes the term mentally ill is used in jest or as a slur. But there are more and more members of Congress referring to Marjorie Taylor Greene as sick or mentally ill, including AOC, who actually said, quote, "This is a woman that's deeply unwell and clearly needs help." It seems obvious that that's the case. Some people saw what AOC said and they said, oh, that's bad. AOC is stigmatizing and making fun of mental illness. I don't see that at all. At a certain point, we have to be able to say, this is not just an ignorant person with disgusting political views. These are ignorant political views that have been weaponized by some kind of mental illness. And you have enough people in this country who either don't realize that this is an unwell woman or they don't care. I don't know. It has to be okay to propose that there is a mental illness component when it's so obviously what's going on. But at the same time, the mental illness component doesn't excuse the political beliefs. It's a double-edged sword. Calling something mental illness when it isn't a good thing to do. At the same time, excusing bad acts because the person seems sick or unwell, we also can't be doing that. It is a complicated issue, particularly in a country where many don't have access to proper mental health services or diagnostic services, and when it's heavily stigmatized, and when, quite frankly, I mean, listen, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying this. There are lots of political beliefs, some on the left, but overwhelmingly on the right, that are delusional beliefs in the literal sense. And so when you see that, it actually can be difficult to distinguish just delusional political beliefs versus someone who is diagnosable. I think with Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's probably both. And that is increasingly what we're hearing from people who know her and who have been targeted and by her, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Let me know your thoughts, but a disgusting analogy and comparison there. Hey, this you have to see. Pakistan has this foreign minister named Shah Mahmood Qureshi. And this guy doesn't even try to hide anti-Semitic slurs with the coded language and sophisticated analogies and metaphors that some try to use to hide their anti-Semitic slurs. He just drops an anti-Semitic slur that Jews control the media during the first 15 seconds of an interview with CNN's Biana Golodriga, and you just have to see this. Now, sadly, and we'll talk about this more later this week, there has been an explosion of anti-Semitic violence around the U.S. in the last few days. Since the Israeli-Gazan ceasefire, there are random Jewish people being attacked and beaten across the U.S., incidents being investigated in Los Angeles and New York and in many other places, people being punched, kicked, beaten. It's insane what's going on. We're seeing it on our channel where we're having to ban, at this point, it's hundreds of people per day. It's never been this bad. It's been bad. It's never been as bad as in the last week. Anti-Semitic comments, and we're just banning people on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, etc., etc. But this isn't random people. Like, I expect to get emails about Jews control the media, from Bob in West Virginia. But this is the Pakistani foreign minister using this line. So let's jump into it. This interview taking place right before the Israeli-Gazan ceasefire was announced. Take a look.
And the Pakistani foreign minister joins me now from New York. Mr. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a very busy day. From your end, do you hear any talks about a possible ceasefire coming anytime soon?
I am convinced the tide is turning. I am convinced the public pressure, the pressure of public opinion is mounting, and ceasefire is inevitable. Israel is losing out. They're losing the media war despite their connections. They are losing the media war. The tide is turning.
What are their connections?
Deep pockets.
What does that mean?
Well, they're very influential people. They control media.
I would call that an anti-Semitic remark.
Well, you see, the point is they have a lot of influence and they get a lot of coverage. Now, what has balanced that is the citizen journalist.
Their connections, deep pockets, they control the media. I have to commend Biana Golodriga because she did something that lots of people won't do, which is just straight up call it what it is, which is anti-Semitic. There's often mincing words where the purveyor of this stuff will use coded language. And then the person doing the interview also will use coded language or mince words in some way. He goes headfirst, dive right into it. Jews control the media with money and influence. And she says that's an anti-Semitic comment. And the foreign minister is sort of unsure how to respond. And he kind of drifts into something else and says, well, let me say this other thing. Now, what's really nuts, and this, I don't even know what to call this. If you look online at articles and segments about this segment, it is riddled with even more anti-Semitic comments saying good for the finance minister for calling out Jewish control of media. There's a huge contingent, and sadly, many are on the American left, who loved what the foreign minister said. It's sad, but it's seen as more acceptable to be openly anti-Semitic at this time because of the Israeli-Palestinian situation, which, of course, relates to Israeli foreign policy, which I find terrible, right? And I've called out, how long have I been against Israeli foreign policy and the Netanyahu administration? I don't know. And the reason that there's general anti-Semitism towards random global Jews is because of the anti-Semitic trope that any Jewish person around the world holds a dual loyalty to Israel. And we've talked about that many times before. Now, by the way, Pakistani Twitter was cheering this as if the finance minister, the foreign minister, did the most heroic thing anybody could have done, finally putting the Jews in their place for control of media, as if it's a new and unstated truth that he's finally willing to say. Pakistani Twitter users have been calling the finance minister courageous, brave, wise. It is jarring. It's not altogether surprising. I saw one nice response to this clip, which was an image of pictures of Jewish elected officials with Stars of David, American elected officials with Stars of David identifying them as Jewish. It was a really nice touch, you can imagine. So anyway, nice job by Biana Golodriga. She's getting absolutely destroyed for this by Pakistani Twitter and by others. It's all become quite more brazen lately. I don't remember it ever being as bad as in the last week. We don't have enough moderators on any of our platforms to actually keep up with the anti-Semitism that has exploded here. And we'll have a little more about this on the show's Instagram. Make sure you're following us there at David Pakman Show. And follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. We'll take a quick break. Next, there's somebody now, you might be able to guess who, proposing a real insurrection, not like the one from January 6th. That's after the break. The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them. As if things weren't a tinderbox already, Fox News propagandist Tucker Carlson is now suggesting a real insurrection on his program. Now, the term real insurrection is, of course, Tucker playing coy with the January 6th Trump riots. Tucker and others claim that January 6th was not really an insurrection. And when they say that, it's never totally clear if they mean it's not really an insurrection because it failed, or it's not an insurrection because it wasn't really meant to be an insurrection. In any case, we've talked before about stochastic terrorism and this idea that with a large enough audience, even subtly, if you put an idea into people's minds, someone becomes likely to go and actually do the thing. If you subtly put the idea in an audience of 100 people to go and kill someone, it's not super likely that someone's really going to do it. But if your audience is 1,000 or 10,000 or 1 million or 10 million, once it gets to be a large audience, that subtle idea becomes more and more likely to actually influence someone in the crowd to go and do the thing you're subtly suggesting they do. In this clip, Tucker's not even floating the idea subtly. He's just saying, why don't we have a real insurrection? And why does he want one? Well, because of misstatements that his guest, the mayor of Uvalde, Texas, Don McLaughlin, tells about immigration. These are lies about immigration, and it makes Tucker say, what about a real insurrection over this? Take a look.
That the people coming north from Latin America, Central America, in a lot of cases, are aware that there's a new administration in the United States and the policies are different?
Oh, most definitely. They're telegraphing it down there. When you see T-shirts with people say, Biden let me in, Biden let me in, they're all over. I mean, it's telegraphed back down there. One of them comes over and they'll tell you. As soon as I get over and get through, I'm calling back home and I'm telling 10 more to come that I got in. Come on. We're sending a message that, hey, the border's open. Come on in. Do what you want. I mean, why aren't we enforcing the laws that are on the book, that are already on the book that says you can't cross that border illegally or whatever? But yet we're going to reward you with putting you in a nice hotel or give you a $1,400 Visa card, debit card that you can use while you're here in the States, till you get established or whatever. And how many times do they replenish it?
What do you mean giving a $14 Visa debit card?
I haven't been able to confirm this yet, but I have told that they're giving you, these immigrant families, they're in these hotels, they're giving them a $1,400 Visa card that they can
Why
go
don't
out
we
and
have
buy.
a real insurrection at some point? Like, why would we put up with this?
Well, in my opinion, you're closer than you've ever been in our country of getting to that. I think we're closer.
Well, I feel closer to that. I mean, this is absolutely, it's beyond insulting. It's oppressing the population.
So there's a lot there. Now, before we get into the really crazy part from Tucker, Don McLaughlin there, the mayor of Uvalde, Texas, said illegal aliens are getting $1,400. This is related to the stimulus package. That the number 1,400 is not a coincidence. 1,400 was what was in the Biden stimulus package. The claim they make is undocumented immigrants are getting $1,400 stimulus checks. It's not true. If an immigrant is here illegally, they won't have a social security number, which you need to have in order to get a stimulus check. Biden's COVID-19 relief package excludes most immigrants who are not in the United States legally from getting stimulus checks. The relief packages during the Trump era did the same thing. It's the same. There's no difference. Only non-citizens who are here authorized to work, who can get a social security number, can get the stimulus. However, according to some in the Associated Press, some people who entered the U.S. on valid temporary working visas, which makes them eligible for a social, if they overstayed, they might accidentally get the $1,400. This is a tiny number of people, and it's a distraction, And the idea that just any old undocumented immigrant is getting $1,400 is completely wrong. It's been widely debunked. But let's get to the really wacky part, this real insurrection that Tucker Carlson wants. This is very dangerous. Now, I am very close to a free speech absolutist. And what I mean by that is I believe any speech that is not actually illegal is legal and thus should be allowed, period. Is that legal? That's a call for violence. It's a real call for violence. It's a clear call for violence. It's not subtle. It's not using coded language. This type of thing is the actually illiberal, anti-democratic, authoritarian threat that we've been talking about. What? Immigrants get $1,400? I don't even know if that's true, but what about a real insurrection? Yes, let's do it. Why not? Right? And then you go back to those claims made in court by some of the Trump rioters from January 6th. Fox News made me do it, Your Honor. Sir, my client was suffering from Foxitis and Foxmania and Fox dementia. It's not really their fault. And as outrageous as we've been saying it is for the party of personal responsibility to say that thing I did, it was Trump and Fox's fault. Well, no, you deserve to be held accountable. But then when Tucker says, how about a real insurrection, you genuinely are starting to muddy it up and make it even more complex to apportion blame and responsibility. Now, one last thing. If such an insurrection happened thanks to Tucker Carlson's not going to be on the front lines leading it. You understand that, right? Tucker will be at his country club or at his vacation home. Tucker is like Trump in that they both value their viewers and supporters respectively as far as they are useful to them. But these people, the people that voted for Trump, donated to Trump, rioted for Trump on January 6th, the people that watch Tucker and would be likely to do what he says when he says, what about a real insurrection? These are the people that Tucker, like Trump, spent their lives trying to stay away from and be isolated from. They don't care about those people beyond their immediate utility, either for ratings or buying Tucker's book. Has Tucker written a book? I don't know. Or voting for Trump or donating to Trump or whatever the case may be. And in that way, Tucker and Trump are actually very similar. They're disgusted by their followers. They have disdain for their followers, but they understand that these are the people that ultimately are responsible for writing the checks that keep them in power or whatever the case may be. Disgusting stuff. And almost as disgusting as this next thing we're going to look at. Radical right-wing media outlet, OAN, is attempting to resurface from the bottom of the trash heap. And they are doing so with a so-called exclusive interview with Donald Trump, which is really indistinguishable from North Korean propaganda. All of the same tired lies were resuscitated. The really wacky intangible here is the performance of the interviewer, whose name is Chanel Rion. We really can't tell this apart from one of those North Korea propaganda interviews. Now, first, check out just the introduction to the interview and the first line of the interview. It's desperately sycophantic. This doesn't even count as journalism, even in the US, and our journalism standards are really low, really, really low. Take a look at this.
President Donald J. Trump left an indelible mark on U.S. politics. From the 25th floor of his iconic New York headquarters, One America News sat down with our 45th president for an exclusive one-on-one discussion. There, he shared with us his forecast, his fears, and his hopes for America's horizon. In the process, we witnessed an illuminating snapshot into the mind of a man whose leadership in battles sparked a movement that forever altered the course of American history. This is an OAN exclusive interview from New York City, New York. Mr. President, we sit here in Trump Tower many days and many miles from what many Americans consider an illegitimate Biden White House.
In the first line of the introduction, she has to mention Biden isn't a legitimate president, as many people see it, Mr. President. When you crowbar illegitimate Biden into the opener, you know it's going to be utterly insane, and it got way wackier when Trump started talking. Here is Donald Trump ranting about a so-called third world election in the United States. And Chanel Rion just can't help but try pushing that same thing about, oh, fraud. Any day now, we're going to uncover the fraud.
And if we can't convince people that that won't happen again, or if we don't get right down to the bottom of it and change it, those people aren't going to be there to vote.
What's
the
your
Republicans
message to
Republicans
them
are going to have to do something, whether it's Mitch McConnell or Kevin McCarthy or the leadership locally. They have to do something. There was an expression that I've heard that you've heard for many years. The vote counter is far more important than the politician or the person running for office. And that was the case in this instance for the presidential election. Very sad that this could happen. It was a third world election.
Well, it looks like a lot of that may well be uncovered very shortly.
It's being uncovered now.
Hopefully we see that.
And it'd be nice if the papers would report it.
There is so much going on here. First of all, on the technical level, why is the audio always terrible with these OAN interviews? The amount of room noise, background noise. Our tech is a disaster. We never have a background noise issue like that. Like I have no idea what I'm doing, but my interviews never sound like that. How can OAN in an interview with the president not make it sound reasonable? What I'm realizing is that an interview with a real anchor or journalist and Trump, it's already wacky just because of the things that Donald Trump says. But at least when there's a sort of real interviewer, the questions can sometimes get back on track. There can sometimes be an attempt to hold Donald Trump accountable for what he's saying. What Chanel Rion from OAN is doing is participating in the shared delusions with Donald Trump. Trump says crazy stuff about fraud, and instead of asking for receipts, she adds to it by saying, oh yeah, any day now we're going to uncover the fraud. Here's another piece of this in which Donald Trump again claims to have blockbuster technology coming. This is great because for months he touted a new digital communication social media platform that he was going to be launching. And instead he just launched a blog. It's just like Blogspot technology installed on his website. And now again, he's teasing he has something really big coming.
So we had a couple of 100 million people. And the problem is, a lot of these platforms, you can't put that many people on. It just doesn't work. They explode. If you put 500,000 on, it's like a lot, and they can't handle it. And the technology just isn't there right now for that. But the technology is coming very rapidly, and we're working on something that I think will be a blockbuster when it happens. It's going to be something that's going to be special. But, you know, I've been offered companies for almost nothing, big chunks of companies that have platforms. The problem is they can't hold the people.
Yeah, the platforms out there just can't handle the amount of people that want to follow Trump. What? Facebook can't hold Trump's audience. Twitter can't hold Trump's audience. YouTube can't hold it. These are delusions of the highest level. And Chanel Rion is just helping him along. And then we get to the point of the interview where Trump again claims the election results aren't possible. He just doesn't believe that he lost, so obviously it must be fraud.
What people want to talk about is it all comes down to what happened in the election. Because you look at Georgia, Georgia was fantastic. What happened to all those votes? What happened to all those people that were standing on the line, wearing red hats, and wearing all sorts of things? What happened? And then you look at Michigan and you look at, how do you win Ohio in a record, and Florida in a record, and South Carolina in a record, and Iowa in a record, and then you lose Michigan and you lose Pennsylvania? We were up at 10:30 in the evening by so much in Pennsylvania, it wasn't doable unless something crooked happened.
It is abundantly clear that he will never move past this. He still hasn't accepted that he lost the popular vote in 2016. He will never admit that he lost in 2020. And it's the same talking points now 6 months out from the election. We were leading at 10 p.m. and suddenly there were these massive dumps of ballots and then we were losing. It's over and over and over again. The same talking point. Let's look at just one more clip and then we'll move on. Trump asked about Joe Biden on China. What was Biden's first mistake? Here we go. See if you can understand this.
China. What was Biden's first mistake?
Well, I think he made many mistakes. Number one, he's shown such weakness. You know, they have planes flying over Taiwan now. They never had this. You know, they never had these problems. You wouldn't have had this problem in Israel. They didn't shoot rockets when I was there. They're shooting thousands of rockets into Israel. That wouldn't have happened with me.
Well, within 4 years, your administration brokered historic peace deals in the Middle East. And within 4 months, the Biden administration essentially is overseeing a war.
just total fantasy world views of how things work. Biden showed weakness, but then he says something about Israel instead. The question was about China. Now, I do think there are people who see interviews like this and they do think Trump has an idea what he's talking about. That's the really scary part. And we know that that's the case because 74 million people voted for the guy. But it's really something else how vapid and meaningless what he says is. And having a reporter help him along, as Chanel Rion did in this, it's very dark for what it portends about journalism in the United States. If you can even really still call this journalism, and I don't think you can. Let me know what you think. Very depressing and bizarre interview. The David Pakman Show is now on Instagram at David Pakman Show. You can check out behind the scenes pictures, memes, shots of the studio, shots of what Pat does all day. Very, very concerning to a lot of people. All of that and more on the David Pakman Show Instagram account at David Pakman Show. So we've had a lot of bad news and kind of things to be bummed out about on today's show. But one thing that really brought a smile to my face was Joe Biden's White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, just not caring anymore when it comes to Fox News reporter Peter Doocy and pointing out to him that the jig is up. She realizes that the dumb questions Peter Doocy asks during press briefings are just to try to get one of those absurd segments on Fox News where the title around the bottom of the screen is some kind of an attack either on Joe Biden or on Jen Psaki herself. And so she's just not going for it. And Peter Doocy tried to ask this completely meaningless question saying, oh, you know, with Trump, it was the art of the deal, but with Joe Biden, it was going to be this other thing related to infrastructure negotiations. And Psaki was just having none of it. Take a look at this.
Marjorie described the infrastructure negotiations as the art of seeking common ground. At some point, does that become the art of the deal?
I don't know. You're the professional here, Peter. You're the TV star, you know? What's the Fox Chiron going to be?
Art of seeking common ground does take a lot of characters.
It does.
I'll check
does.
the control room.
The art of the deal. We'd be okay with that. Yeah.
With the art of the deal, I think that's a headline.
Well, there you go. An art of a different kind of deal. A deal for the working people.
Got it.
Okay, go ahead.
So
glad we could work that out.
Thank you very much.
The feel of Peter Doocy's questions is that he's trying to play reporter, and Jen Psaki humors him almost like he's not really competent, but she just has to pretend to treat him as if he were a competent reporter. And the really funny thing is I think he's supposed to be seen as asking tough questions. Like when he does this stuff, I think there's a contingent of the Fox News audience that sees that and says, wow, he's really there and he's asking tough questions. But the questions are so silly and childish and not actually serious in any way that Jen Psaki and even Joe Biden seem to enjoy taking questions from Peter. Like if it were actually the case that this guy was asking such tough questions and putting them in such difficult positions, they wouldn't be so eager to hear from him. They almost seem entertained by it. And it's almost a curiosity to see what flaccid nonsense Peter Doocy is going to come up with next. And you get the feeling that Jen Psaki treats Peter Doocy, and in some cases that Newsmax reporter named Emerald, who was in the room last week or the week before, she's sort of treating them like you treat one of your kids when they're having a temper tantrum. And she has young kids. You humor it, you allow them to say the thing they want to say, and then you move on while showing that it's not really something mommy is impressed with. And that's the vibe I get from Jen Psaki during these moments. Now, after this failed, Peter Doocy tries again, apparently with a, quote, real question. It doesn't really go much better. It's almost sometimes when he's reading his questions like he's struggling to understand because the emphasis and the syntax seems strange. I don't really know. Let's take a look.
Quickly on immigration, the governor of Tennessee says that he was asked and he declined a Biden administration request to house unaccompanied minors. And in coming days or in recent days, there have been some reports that at least 4 planes filled with unaccompanied minors landed in his state, some in the middle of the night. Can you explain what's going on there?
Well, as we have been very clear about, children, our objective is to unite these unaccompanied children under the age of 18, with families, with sponsor families. So children have been traveling through Tennessee. They're simply on their way to unite with relatives and sponsors, to meet sponsors in the state, or just traveling through Tennessee until they reach another destination to unite with family members or legal sponsors. As you know, geographically, it's right in a place where there's a lot of states around it, so it's a place where some flights have gone through as children are moving to other destinations.
And since this was something that the governor of the state said he didn't want, this is not a case of federal officials trying to sneak something past the state level officials.
I think I'm confirming here that Tennessee is a state that is right near in the middle of the country, and some kids have to travel through there to get through their destination, and we've been very clear that our objective is to treat these kids humanely, get them to safe homes, especially homes of loved ones and sponsored families.
This is an attempt at a new fake scandal, which is the Tennessee governor doesn't want any of Biden's migrant children traveling through the state of Tennessee. But the Tennessee governor was silent about this when it was Trump doing the same thing. Doocy's question, of course, ignores that relevant context. And yet, some flights have stopped in Tennessee in moving migrant children around. These are government flights mostly, stopping mostly at government air bases. And Doocy wants to gin up a controversy that Joe Biden is ignoring the requests of the Tennessee governor. The reality is that a flight stopping in Tennessee for people to change planes or to reunite with their families who may be living in Tennessee, it's not really the spirit of what the Tennessee governor is even talking about. And this is, again, mostly the federal government using their airplanes and airport resources available at their disposal. But it's supposed to be another scandal. And hilariously, they then moved on to this was being done secretly. Check out this headline from a recent episode of Hannity on Fox News called "Biden Administration Secretly Flying Migrant Children into Tennessee," report says. Now, again, secretly, when these are government planes going to military bases, airports at military bases, is it secret that it's just not like, oh, it's United Flight 5 from New York to LA? To call it secret is also a stretch. It couldn't be more deceptive. The reality is that the Biden administration is just like the Trump administration, continuing to use geographically convenient airports around the country for layovers for children in their custody. And the priority should be reuniting those kids with their families, which, by the way, the number of kids who have not yet been reunited is down 84% last month under the Biden administration. It's not yet a victory. Immigration has not been solved. DACA has not been dealt with. But this is at least some progress from what we were seeing under the Trump administration. The reuniting of the children with their families might most conveniently be done in Tennessee or with a layover in Tennessee. It's very simple. Everything is a scandal now. And of course, unfortunately, none of them are really catching on as scandals. But it doesn't matter because there's this general idea from the right, if you watch Fox News, that Joe Biden is beleaguered and riddled in scandal. Individually, none of the scandals really catch on. But you still are starting to see reflected in polling the idea that Biden is just embroiled in scandal among Fox News viewers and Republican voters. So this stuff works. There's a reason why they keep doing this stuff. As you and I might see it and say, another fake scandal. This is trash. This is meaningless. It actually does work to convince a lot of people. So there are a number of stories related to 2020 voter fraud that we will be covering tomorrow. And I have one for today. And the story is still all about voter fraud for the 2020 election. You might be thinking, wow, David, it's almost June. They must be talking about voter fraud in some local election that was last month. No, they're still talking about recounts, audits, voting machines, about the November 2020 election. OK, Zachary Patrizio from Salon has a wild Twitter thread which outlines how MyPillow CEO and Trump crony Mike Lindell claims to have physically obtained Dominion and Smartmatic voting machines apparently used in the 2020 election. He claims to commit fraud in that election and is hiding the machines around the country, almost like some weird geocaching, Check out this complete absurdity. Zachary Patrizio writing, quote, MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell is now claiming he has not only obtained both Dominion and Smartmatic voting machines, but also has hidden the machines in secret locations around the country. Okay, so that's already bonkers off the wall stuff. Goes on to say, quote, according to a Mike Lindell assistant who just spoke with Salon, the pillow maven is currently flying somewhere now and is unable to comment on the matter. Then it gets even wilder, saying that, quote, according to public information, I can confirm that Lindell is now flying aboard his private jet, tail number N497SP, which took off from New Bedford, Massachusetts, and appears to be heading west at this time. Unclear if he is traveling with a voting machine. They actually have the receipts from the flights, finding out that, quote, Lindell made a very quick stop at Elmira Corning Airport in Horseheads, New York, and is now on his way back to New Bedford, Massachusetts. Remains unclear if a machine is hiding in Horseheads and why it was such a fast trip. This is almost like a bizarre backwards scavenger hunt of some kind. How much of this new nonsense of Lindell flying around claiming to have voting machines, how much of this is going to come out in the civil suit against Mike Lindell by Dominion Voting Systems, by the way? If he did obtain voting machines, who did he get them from? If you get an extra firm MyPillow pillow and it's a bit too firm, maybe there's a voting machine in there. I received an email from a viewer saying, David, don't you realize what's going on? This is Mike Lindell starting to lay the groundwork for an insanity defense. No. Lindell is a narcissist like Trump. They don't think they can get caught. They don't believe they will get in trouble. Could this be the explanation for the recent UFO UAP stuff that's been much discussed? Could it be Mike Lindell launching voting machines around the skies? No, I don't believe so. Will they ever be done and satisfied with the 2020 election and the voting machine stuff? Probably not. But this is the latest. Mike Lindell reportedly now has voting machines in his possession. Really wild times we live in. Really wild and depressing. We have a voicemail number. You can call that number anytime. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a delightful caller. Monday, I'm trying to keep it positive with delightful callers. This is a delightful caller who got COVID multiple times, she says, and is just thrilled to finally be vaccinated. Take a listen.
Hi, David. This is Nancy from Utah. And I just wanted to tell you how excited I was to get my vaccine. I got COVID twice. I was positive once in September and once in January and got quite sick both times. So I was thrilled to go get my vaccine. I couldn't be more pleased to finally not have to worry about COVID again. I must be some kind of freaky COVID magnet. Love your show. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm really sorry that you had COVID twice. Listen, we have the tools, my friends. We have the tools to crush this virus. We have vaccines that work against the variants. We've just got to use them, and we've got to use them quickly. And we'll have an update a little bit later this week about where we are as far as vaccines go. But things, I know that there's still a lot of doom and gloomers, but Europe is opening. Travel is restarting. Kids are going back to school in the fall. College students at many schools will be required to be vaccinated. There are some businesses now saying our employees will have to be vaccinated to come back and do in-person work. We look at the numbers that we're seeing in countries that are achieving even modest levels of vaccination. Look at our cases. We've only fully vaccinated 37% in the United States. Okay. And we are crushing the numbers. They're still too high, but they're the lowest they've been in a really long time. We are probably 20 days from being at 50% fully vaccinated. Look at what happened in Israel when they got to 50% fully vaccinated. There are good things coming up, and we should all be happy about that. And we should all follow CDC guidelines as I continue to do. We have a great bonus show for you today. Many House Republicans are being fined more and more money for not wearing their masks, which are still required on the House floor. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been fined and others have been fined. Will they pay the fines is the question. We're going to talk about that. A viral video, well known to many in our audience on YouTube, is leaving YouTube and instead will be selling as an NFT, a non-fungible token. Is this the future of YouTube videos? Very interesting. And lastly, Rick Santorum has been fired by CNN. And it was over those comments where he was caught saying there was nothing of value here in the United States when the European settlers arrived, like other than all those Native American civilizations. Very ugly and also non-real, non-empirically based comments. And CNN has now fired Rick Santorum. Republicans are saying it's cancel culture. Canceled. Sort of like they did to Liz Cheney for saying Trump really lost. So we are going to talk about that on the bonus show as well. Become a member today to get instant access by signing up at joinpakman.com. Or we're only 1 week away from our Memorial Day membership bomb, single day membership special. Be notified of it by signing up at davidpakman.com for my newsletter. Monday morning, the 31st, you'll get a beautiful email from me personally saying, hey, you know what? Here's how you do it. Here's how you sign up for that hugely discounted membership. All right, we'll talk to you on the bonus show in mere moments. We are here all week. We are off Monday, Memorial Day. I'm going to be so busy processing these massive membership dumps, we can't possibly do a show. No, and we like giving the staff federal holidays off. All right, see everybody on the bonus show or tomorrow.